So today we're going to talk about qualifications and changing roles for the presidency. Formal qualifications of the president, obviously the main ones are you have to be 35 years old to run, 35 years old, you have to live in the U.S. for 14 consecutive years, and you have to be a natural-born citizen. All of that we've gone over in class. Informal qualifications are things not necessarily listed in the Constitution, but they are qualifications that a lot of presidents share. Most presidents went to college. Here's a list of presidents that never went to college, though. The list of people that did go is significantly higher, obviously. Almost half of all presidents have been lawyers. Most presidents have some sort of military experience. More recently, we've been electing non-military experienced presidents. You can see a lot of the people listed here from the 20th and 21st centuries, including Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and more recently, Donald Trump. Most presidents have experience in the government. Only Zachary Taylor and now Donald Trump are the only presidents to serve as president without having any prior government experience. Also, pretty much every president has been Protestant. The only one to not be a Protestant was John F. Kennedy. His wife was asked while he was campaigning what she thought about the rumors that he would answer to the Pope directly if he were elected, because people were worried about that for some reason. I don't know. But her response was hilarious. She said, "I don't know why everyone's so concerned about John being a Catholic. It's not like he's a good one." Moving on. Most presidents have been married. Only James Buchanan was not, which has led to rumors about his sexuality. I don't know that that's fair, but it happens. Pretty much all of our presidents have been white, with the exception of Barack Obama. All of them have been male. We have never had a president or a vice president to be female, though we have had, I think, 3 women total run for either of those positions. The Constitution sets presidential terms at 4 years, but it originally did not limit the number to 2 terms. George Washington set the precedent of serving only 2 terms in his farewell speech. The 22nd Amendment was passed in 1951, which does limit the president to having a maximum of 4-year terms. 2 4-year terms or a maximum of 10 years. And it was passed, of course, in response to FDR being elected to 4 terms, which I guess was super annoying to Congress. So wait a minute, how does the president get to serve for 10 years potentially? Well, if a president dies in office, resigns, or is removed from office with 2 or fewer years remaining on his term, the vice president can serve those 2 years and potentially be elected 2 more times in his own right. So that's where that 10 comes from. All right, so let's talk about pros and cons of a 4-year term limit. Obviously, the pro is that it's a safeguard against dictatorship and tyranny. A con is that it's undemocratic, and it undercuts the president's authority during his last term, often leading to lame duck sessions. There are 8 powers that the president has. They're his chief roles, so he's the chief executive, the chief of state, the chief diplomat, the chief legislature, the chief citizen, the commander-in-chief, the chief of the party, and the chief guardian of the economy. So let's talk about what those are. As the chief of state, the president acts as an example and a symbol of the United States. You can think of him as being like the face of the U.S. Kings and queens also are heads of state. He represents America at special occasions and ceremonies like funerals and awards and things like that. And is expected to give speeches on behalf of the United States abroad. He's also the chief executive. That means he acts as the boss of the federal agencies under the executive branch. There are 14 departments. 13 of them have cabinet heads in the cabinet. One of them is the Department of Justice. The president can choose his cabinet members to advise and assist him, and they are supposed to help him carry out, enforce, and execute the law. The president can also act as a chief diplomat. He conducts foreign policy by directing actions of American ambassadors. He signs treaties and trade agreements with leaders of other nations. This is a very famous picture of Ronald Reagan hanging out with Gorbachev in the 80s. He acts as commander-in-chief. He's in charge of the U.S. Armed Forces. He can decide where armed forces are to be stationed and what weapons are to be used. He has access to the nuclear codes. He can send troops anywhere in the world for 30 days without talking to Congress about it. And the Secretary of Defense works under the president and advises the president. He acts as the chief legislator. Congress, of course, has the power to make laws, but the president can propose bills, they can veto bills, they can sign bills into law. The president also often calls members of Congress to lobby for his agenda to get them to pass what he wants. The president also has the ability to call a joint session of Congress. Usually he does that at the State of the Union, which usually happens on January 20th. And there he kind of outlines his plan for the nation and just kind of hopes that Congress goes with it. By the way, this picture is of Bill Clinton in 1996, 97, I think it's 97, with his vice president, Al Gore, who's the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, in the background. And then this is another famous picture of Ronald Reagan and his joint session. The president acts as the chief of the party. Presidents help members of their party get elected or appointed to office. They can make campaign speeches needed for re-election. They head fundraising for the party, and they can reflect party wants by supporting certain bills or not. So, like, for example, Barack Obama actually had relatively high approval ratings towards the end of his presidency, which is kind of rare. So he went out on the road and did a little bit of campaigning for Hillary Clinton and senators and congressmen from the Democratic Party, making speeches and things like that. He also was known to hold fundraisers for the Democratic Party. Some of the more famous ones included, there were a few fundraising dinners held by people like George Clooney, and they would sell plates for, I think, $1,000, and all that money would go to the Democratic Party. The president acts as the chief guardian of the economy. They monitor unemployment, with some help, obviously, from their cabinet, inflation, taxation, business issues, and the general welfare of the nation. The president does not, however, control the economy, but he usually gets credit if it goes well, and he gets blamed if it goes poorly, and sometimes supporting certain things can cause spikes in the stock market. So, like, if the president were to, like, come out tomorrow and say, I think we should go to war with Japan, probably the stock market would go really crazy and would potentially crash because Japan is a major trade partner. So, there is some control there, but for the most part, the economy is outside of the president's purview, but he does get blamed or credited if it's going well or not. This is a quote by President Truman that was also quoted by JFK in his 1962 speech about his role as chief citizen. That's the idea that the president doesn't just represent his supporters, but he's supposed to represent everyone in the U.S. And the quote says, only 14 or 15 Americans have the resources to have representatives in Washington. The interest of the great mass of the other people, 150 or 60 million, is the responsibility solely of the President of the United States. All right, so this is your first flipped assignment. Look back through the 8 roles of the president that we discussed. Which do you think is the most important and which do you think is the least? Explain each. So now let's talk about the expansion of the presidency. So presidential power is formal and informal. The formal powers come from Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, which lays out the basic powers of the president, but they are vague. It says he can command troops and make treaties and nominate ambassadors and recommend, approve, or reject legislation. He can grant reprieves and pardons. He can nominate federal judges. And then he has informal powers that come from the personal exercise of powers and also popular mandate, which is the idea that if the majority of people in the U.S. voted for a president, he has the right to change policies because he has, like, the mandate of the people. He has the blessing of the people. Here's a good quote from Teddy Roosevelt on executive power. He said, I have used every ounce of power there was in the office, and I have not cared a rap for the criticisms of those who spoke of my usurpation of power. I believe that the efficiency of this government depends on its possessing a strong central executive. And I think this is a sentiment that George W. Bush would agree with. I think it's a sentiment that Barack Obama would agree with, and it's definitely a sentiment that I think Donald Trump would agree with. All right, so why has the role of the president changed over time? Well, a lot of it has to do with technology, the unity of the office, crisis, or just personality. So, like, for example, the president is really powerful these days, much more so than, like, George Washington was, because ultimately, at the end of the day, George Washington could command a militia with some muskets. The United States these days has a bona fide, massive military that's way larger than any other military in the world, and it is equipped with a lot of devastating weapons, including enough nuclear weapons to destroy all of humanity several times. There's unity in the office. There's one person heading up the executive branch as compared to 535 people vying for power in Congress. Anytime there's a time of crisis, presidents tend to be given more power. Lincoln was allowed to suspend writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War. FDR interned Japanese Americans during World War II. They're just given more power in times of crisis. There's personality versus policies. Taft expanded his power through force of personality, as I guess did Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt also expanded the powers of the presidency through, like, trust busting and things like that. So President Nixon is actually a really good example of executive privilege. Executive privilege is this thing in the Constitution that says that the president has the authority to keep certain things secret because ultimately he protects a lot of secret information for different institutions within the government. And Richard Nixon was asked to testify against himself in Nixon versus the U.S., and he was asked to turn over recorded meetings that he had recorded himself in the White House to be reviewed by the investigation panel. And he cited executive privilege, saying that he did not need to. And one of the outcomes of Nixon versus the U.S. is that the Supreme Court said, actually, you do have to turn over the tapes. You do have to do what we say, because executive privilege only applies to, like, national security crises, not your own personal issues. The presidency has continued to assume more and more power over the years through the use of executive orders. That's an order by the president that has the effect of law, but can be overturned by the next president if they want. The most infamous executive order is Executive Order 9066, which is this one here, in which FDR ordered the internment of Japanese Americans at camps in the desert. We looked at a similar chart to this. These are just the more modern presidents from FDR to Obama and the number of executive orders that they did every year of their term. Just to give you a little bit of comparison. They are becoming more and more frequent, but you can see that they are used more during times of quote-unquote crisis, when there's an economic crisis or a war. The president has assumed power through the use of executive agreements. That's basically a treaty, but it doesn't have to go through Congress. The president can sign a pact with other foreign heads of state. And just like an executive order, it has the power of a treaty, but other presidents can undo it really easily. Again, the main draw to this is that it does not require congressional approval. The president has assumed power through declaring war, unofficially, of course, because they can't officially declare war. John Adams sent troops to fight the French. Other presidents have done the same. Like in Korea or Vietnam, we haven't had a war officially declared since World War II. Every conflict we've been in since then, militarily, has just been the president deploying troops to different places and then Congress approving of it. The War Powers Resolution was passed in the 1970s as a result of the Vietnam War. The War Powers Resolution said that the president must tell Congress within 48 hours where and how many troops and all the information about that they're planning on sending troops and why. Congress has to approve of a stay of troops if they are to be there longer than 60 days. And once they hit that 60-day mark, every 30 days, the president has to get Congress's approval to continue to keep troops somewhere. Congress can end the dispute at any time that they choose to, but usually they don't, because once you have Americans engaged in fighting, it can be dangerous to pull them out without warning. This is your last flipped assignment. I'm going to attach two short readings. One is about the War Powers Resolution, and the other is about the U.S. Patriot Act passed under George W. Bush. So just read them and then describe how each of them has changed the power of the presidency. All right, that's all. I'll see you all tomorrow.